Hello, everybody. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. From what I gather, it's a pretty snowy Tuesday for most of us. So hopefully you guys are staying warm. And hello to everybody who's watching in other countries. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are. And I hope you guys are all doing wonderful today. I'm really excited for today's show. I've been trying to get this artist on for a while, so I'm really excited that he's finally here. For those of you who don't know me, obviously I am not Eric Rhodes. He is preparing for Art Business Mastery Day, which we have coming up on Saturday. So I am filling in for him this week, which is so awesome because I love getting to do these shows. For those of you who don't know me, I'm 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗶. I've been with Streamline for, gosh, almost 13 years now. I'm project manager. I manage the art competition. I am also the community ambassador for Pastel Today because that's my favorite medium. But I am actually dabbling in gouache, which is why I'm super excited for this artist to be joining us today. So without further ado, welcome Bernard Dellario.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, definitely. I was telling Bernard before the show, I first saw his artwork with the Plein salon when he was entering that. And then I started following him on Instagram, and I love the way that he paints. It's very expressive and just, I don't know what it is about it. I just love it. Sometimes it's so hard to explain why you love something, but I just love it. And he does acrylic and gouache. And what are you going to share with us today?
Today I'm going to be talking specifically how I work in gouache, and I'll be going over the details of how I work in plein air with the medium.
And that is going to be perfect because that's exactly what I want to learn because I tried it at the convention in May and I had no clue what I was doing. And I gave up after like 5 minutes. I'm like, this is not working. So this is going to be great. So let's get this show started.
Okay, great.
It's Art School Live with Eric Rhodes.
Hello, welcome everyone. Obviously, I am not Eric Rhodes. I am 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗶𝗏. It's been a while since I've hosted, so I forgot I need to do that. Eric is preparing for our event that we have coming up on Friday, Art Business Mastery Day. So I get the pleasure of hosting you guys all this week. And I'm really excited for today's guest. This is Bernard Dellario. He is a gouache and acrylic artist that I fell in love with his arts. Gosh, it's probably been a couple of years now. Through Plein Salon, and then I started following him on Instagram, and he's just got a lot of great work. So I am super excited that he's going to be sharing with us today about how to paint plein air with gouache. So without further ado, let's get started. And Bernie, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. I'm really excited to be with you all today, and thank you for inviting me. So in addition to gouache and acrylic, I also paint in oil, which is actually my favorite medium. But I started painting in gouache a number of years ago. From a dear teacher of mine who introduced me to the medium. And it's one of those things I had to learn by myself. But I ended up loving the medium specifically for plein air. And that's what I'm going to be talking with you about that today. So before we get started with the actual demonstration, I'd like to go over some of the supplies that I use when I'm working in the studio or in plein air. First of all, there are two methods I use when I paint in gouache. The traditional method is out of the tube, which I call the wet method, squeezing your paint out onto a palette and mixing your paints that way. The other method is the dry method, which I'll explain in a moment. But today I'm going to be going over the wet method, which really is just, tubes of paint, these gouache tubes of paint. And I work in a primarily limited palette. So at most I'll have 4 colors plus white on my palette. And speaking of white, with gouache, you're going to want a larger tube of white because that is what you're going to use the most. More. Yeah. I'd really suggest getting a good quality brand. I tend to use Holbein. That's my preferred brand. But Winsor Newton's fine, all the good makers. Now, quickly, the dry method, y'all remember those dry watercolor sets?
Yeah.
I squeeze out some of those paints into these little containers. They're quite, messy, but it's an even more sort of economical way to use your gouache paint. You actually intentionally let it dry. And I have this small kit, and I also have a little bigger kit. These are great for traveling. I do a lot of travel with the workshops. And,
do you find the consistency is the same when you let it dry out that way?
So it's a bit different. You have to do a little bit of a reconstituting of the material to get it to work. and it's not going to be quite like fresh out of the tube, but some of those paintings that you showed at in the beginning were done with this dry set. And I would argue that with a little bit of work, they look just as good as the tube paintings do. But today we're going to be going over the wet method.
Okay.
Now, to further explain, we all have the whatever setup you use in plein air, the tripod, clamshell box, all that good stuff. And I certainly have all those setups. But when I travel specifically, I go very light. So what I've come up with is just a system where I either sit down or sometimes stand to use this material. And I just have this 12x16 homemade gator board portfolio. I put my papers inside. And what I do is I tape my painting surface to the bottom. And then just give me a moment here to set it up. I clip a paper palette to the top, okay?
Okay.
And on the back, there's a pop socket.
Ooh, that's nice. That's
Put
handy.
it between my fingers, and if I needed to stand, I could stand with this sort of like that.
Yeah.
Okay. The other cool thing is this little.
Yeah. What is that?
I have to give credit to a student of mine. I can't remember her name, unfortunately. She had one of these. It's a regular bulldog clip, but it's got this cup holder, which, look at this. It actually holds a water cup.
Okay. I'm making notes here.
So, I think if you Google, I don't know if they're called bulldog clip
Yeah.
water holder or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. As far as brushes go, I'm pretty hard on my brushes. I just get synthetic watercolor brushes. My preferred brand that I use a lot of is a Princeton Umbria brush. And I tend to like flats and a round for some details.
So what I've noticed with a lot of gouache plein air painters is they really favor the flat brush. Is there a particular
I'm a flat brush painter in pretty much all my mediums. And let's face it, flat brushes turn into filberts over time.
Yeah.
So you eventually have flats, filberts, and I use rounds with gouache, and I typically don't use rounds with either acrylic or water or oil paint for some reason. But for gouache, I find you get really precise, calculated marks with gouache, as you'll see.
Mm-hmm.
I think a round brush is nice for doing that. And just finally, I have a sort of a mini setup that I just showed you, which is half the size of that 12x16.
Oh, that's perfect for
do
what
things in like cafes or interiors where you want to be sort of clandestine to work. So it's a really great medium for, I tell folks, if you're an oil painter or even an acrylic painter, you really need to try this stuff because the economics of traveling with it, the drying times, you can't beat it. Those things that I showed you, if you have a water source, that's all you need to create really, really nice paintings. So
yeah, I know Eric has started, for those of you who don't know, Eric is the one who normally hosts this show. He's our CEO and host of Plein Air Convention. He has started when he's traveling, taking gouache with him instead of trying to take all the oils and that stuff. And so I've heard of a lot of people who are kind of transitioning that way, even pastel artists, just because it's easier to travel with it.
Yeah, exactly. I've been using this thing, as I mentioned, it has to be 20, 25 years. And back in the day, people would look at me like, what is that? And you never saw a lot of it. And there was certainly nobody teaching it. But I've noticed over the last 5 years, more and more artists are using it. And I'm always touting the properties of it. And it's a nice crossover medium. So if you're a watercolorist, you know how water media works. So
Yeah.
it's transition. And for the oil painter and acrylic painter, you get to do the putting a light over a dark thing, which we love to do. So for that regard, it's really a good crossover medium.
That's awesome.
All right. So, if we don't have any other questions or anything, we could jump into the demonstration video and I could talk through how I put
Well,
this.
we just got one question, which is any tips for painting with gouache well below freezing?
Probably not the best guy to answer for that because I'm sort of one of those plein air painters that doesn't go out when it's below freezing.
Yeah, like me, warm weather painter. I know.
However, I will say I do car painting with this stuff. So you could drive somewhere. I put that portfolio, I rest it on my steering wheel, and you could do paintings from your car.
Yeah.
And I've not painted with it in freezing weather, and it probably will freeze. So.
Yeah, it's not like watercolor where you could paint with gin and not have it freeze.
Yeah, I suppose you could.
I mean, if you're using the dry method, like you're suggesting, paint with vodka or gin or something, you could.
Or heated water source. You have a thermos.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a way around it.
Okay, well, let's move forward a little bit here.
Okay, so if we could launch the video, I'll sort of talk over that.
Yes. Maybe. Oh, what happened? Amandine, did I break it? Technical difficulty. Hold on just one second.
Do you want me to try from my end?
Yeah. Can you click on it and click add to stage?
I already have it here. I see it playing down below, but it's not showing up.
Yeah. Huh. That's weird.
Vernon, can you re-upload it into the studio the same way you did it the first time?
Sure. Do I have to delete it from here? Remove from studio. Okay, present video file. There we go. Okay. So does everybody see that? We good to go?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm obviously painting in my studio for this demonstration, and I apologize for the messy palette. I was working on a painting prior to doing this. But this is a typical scene that I would paint here. I live on the Eastern Shore. This is right down the road in St. Michael's. And let me talk a little bit about my surfaces too. So I painted a bunch of different surfaces with gouache, which is the other nice thing about this medium. This happens to be gessoed paper. Almost any paper will do. I like either watercolor paper or Bristol paper, or straight watercolor paper is just as fine.
What's Bristol paper?
Bristol, Strathmore Bristol paper.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Smoother, or either the smooth or plate finish. And why do I put gesso on it?
Oh, yeah. Why do you do that?
I put gesso on it because one of the things about gouache is it dries quickly, which is a plus and a minus. Because if you like to move paint around, which I'd like to do, gessoing your paper sort of prevents the material from soaking into the fibers too quickly.
Oh, that would explain why I had such a hard time. I painted on a canvas in gesso, and that explains why I had such a hard time.
So if it's really absorbent paper, it's going to suck in your material right out of the gate, which is not that really pleasant to do. So gessoing the paper sort of gives you a little bit of a slipperier feel to work with. And I don't always do that. Sometimes I'll go straight on watercolor paper. But the palette I'm using here is, let me go from left to right. So on the left side, sort of below the yellow there, is burnt sienna. Above that is just a primary yellow, sort of like a middle of the road yellow. Then there's primary red next to that, which is hard to tell, but it's red. Ultramarine blue, and of course, white. And this is a typical palette. I do many paintings in this palette. If I'm feeling crazy, I'll squeeze out a secondary color, such as a green or a purple or a violet. But that's few and far between. I do most of my plein air work in something akin to this palette.
And what's for people who don't know why you would do that, what's the benefit to painting in a limited palette?
When I started painting, I painted with like 20 some colors, and I was more of a studio painter. And I think, really understanding how to mix color with the base colors, I think you get a more harmonious looking painting when you understand the nuances of how paint interacts and mixes together. It's a little harder because you have to understand how to get nuance of color. But once you figure that out, I've never gone back. And it's just, you have simpler, more finite decisions. You don't have to worry about which red to use or which, if you got 3 or 4 reds, it gets infinitely more complicated to figure out.
And can you tell me the difference between, because I know there's titanium white and there's zinc white. What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so I tend not to use zinc white. There's a specific use for that. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's if you want more cleaner mixtures in your colors, and zinc tends to be more transparent. So
Okay.
it's not going to have the covering strength that titanium or permanent white has with gouache. So I tend just to stick with either titanium or permanent white. So if you have a choice and you haven't tried this material, I wouldn't try zinc out of the gate. I'd just stick with titanium or permanent white.
And do you use any sort of blending medium to get because it looks very smooth the way that you're painting. Do you blend it all, or is it just straight out of the tube with a little bit of water?
Tube with a little bit of water. Now, if you're new to this medium and want to give it a go on your own, my first caution will be your inclination is going to be, and it's always, I see it all the time when I'm teaching this medium, artists will tend to use too much water. So you really have to modulate your water usage. And what you want to do instead is really pick up that paint. So if you notice in the beginning of this video, I used a bigger brush. I was shoveling up that paint and really scooping it on there to get it to move around. You use the moisture in the paint to get it to mix together as opposed to too much water. One of the things about gouache, what you're going to find out is it has a sort of a contradictory drying property. So what does that mean? So your darks are going to dry lighter and your lights are going to dry darker.
Oh, that was so infuriating. I struggle with values on a normal day. So when I started working with gouache, it just drove me nuts.
Yeah, and I think the use of water or the overuse of water tends to exacerbate that problem. But it's one of the things, like, painting is just a series of corrections, right? So it's something you get over. So once it dries, you just know you have to nudge it in one direction or another, as you see me doing here. So as things are drying and changing in value or changing in color, you just go over them. The other thing I'll point out is use a lot of paint. So if you're going to venture into this medium and are unsure about it, do not be shy about really squeezing that paint out and just getting it on your surface and moving it around. That's when you're going to get the best results. So
have you ever used a stay wet palette?
I've tried it, and they certainly work fine. What I tend to do, especially if I'm working outside, so let me talk about that a moment. When you work outside, depending on your environment, if it's a hot, dry day, those paints are going to really dry quickly. So first of all, try and seek shade if you can. That's going to help. The other thing to do is have a little spritzer bottle with you and sort of spray your piles of paint throughout the process. The other thing is, don't squeeze out a whole big pile that you might use like 15 minutes down the road.
Yeah.
Squeeze out little bits at a time. But stay wet palettes are certainly fine and doable. I tend not to use them. This is something I'm just used to using this method.
Yeah.
But a stay wet palette is fine. So feel free to use that.
And someone just asked, let me find it here. Does gouache layer like oil or like watercolor?
So I guess it would layer more like watercolor, but not in the transparent idea of that. So you have as you see here, there's a lot of paint down there on that painting at this point. So other than the beginning, when you're first laying it in, you have all the opportunity in the world to sort of move your brush around, do all sorts of sort of frictional movements and sort of get it to stick on there. Once you have a layer of paint down, you have to recalculate how you put paint on top of that. So as you see me doing here, you have to be a little more delicate, and you can't be too aggressive. Now, if it's an analogous color or something that's close in, like I'm doing now, I'm putting more white over that cloud. Because once you start introducing moisture over that initially painted area, which is at this point dry or getting close to dry, it's going to reactivate and mix into the mixture you're putting on top. So you have to be a little more delicate and sort of let the paint just sort of sit on the surface. So I guess it's very similar because, with oil paint, for instance, you really can't go in there aggressively over previous painted areas. You have to be sort of calculated about how you lay the paint down. But,
right.
you get the hang of it after a while.
And have you used, so I struggled with that, so I started trying to play with acrylic gouache. Have you used that?
So yeah, acrylic gouache is gouache that with some sort of acrylic binder in it that dries permanently. Um, I really like the reconstitutability of this medium, so I tend not to use that. If I'm going to do that, I'll just use acrylic paint. But I think it can be useful as if you want to use those as sort of your underpainting.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing, because I found that when I was trying to like re-wet an area to rework it, I kept taking away my background. And so that's when I started using the acrylic gouache. You said something that just made me think of something else, and now I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, just to add on that for a moment, though, but I'm really about simplicity when I paint, specifically outside. So I tend to go with just the simplest method possible. So if I have to bring acrylic gouache and regular gouache, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But if it works for you, go for it.
And what was that? You had a little square tool that you were using. What was that?
Okay, so that's you get those throwaway credit card things or your insurance card that's plastic but really not that rigid. I save those because those are great sort of what I call deconstruction tools. So I do it a lot in my oil paintings, or you can use them in your gouache work, but you have to do it right when the paint's wet. It sort of messes the paint up a little bit, or sort of knocks down the paint marks with it. It just gives you another opportunity to have those moments in your painting that aren't really sort of controlled with your brush movements. Give you those sort of surprise things that I tend to like. So yeah, you don't have to use that, but it's something that I use now and again to give me a different look. But this actual painting here is a good example of the iterative process of how a gouache painting is built up. And just so you know, this goes for any medium. And if you watch any of my demos or see my paintings side by side to this subject, I really go off script quite a bit. I'm really not one of those painters that really has to be that matchy with what I'm looking at. I'm a firm believer that the source, whether it be a photograph or what you're looking at in real life, is your inspiration. And don't get too hung up on, copying everything just as it is or trying to match your colors perfectly. Let the painting sort of drive that decision. And, this goes with hand in glove with working with a limited palette, because oftentimes you're not able to achieve those color mixtures that you're seeing. You can get close, and, sometimes close is all you need.
Yeah.
Because the painting really dictates how it all works together. And in the end, no one's really going to see what you painted from. As long as the painting works, it's all you need.
Right.
So that philosophy holds true for really all the paintings I do. But I tend, just like oil, I tend to go from a, dark to light sort of scenario. Building up my lights have them more paint in them than the darks do. Those sort of dictums of working in sort of those opaque mediums really hold true for the way I paint in gouache as well. But now I'm switching to my sort of rounds to give me a little bit more control and adding some more details here and there. But yeah, it's a really great medium. I use it a lot for practice in my studio as well. If I'm, or to do studies for bigger paintings, plays a big part in my practice as far as that. So I tell students all the time, if you want to get better as a painter, you got to paint a lot.
Yeah.
And this medium is so great, not only for travel and plein air work, it's a great medium for just getting your butt in your studio with little fuss and working on paintings. I mean, this demo is a half-hour sketch. So you could do these anywhere. You get that sort of institutional knowledge built into your brain, having done another painting, and that's how you get better, is one after the other. Just keep doing that over and over again. So I find that has been a really good way for how my painting has grown, is because I paint in so many different mediums, in a lot of sketching. That really has helped me grow in my art. So I really encourage folks to give it a try.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to do that.
So it's also great to, not only doing these paintings on these separate pages, but, I love sketchbooks. I'm sort of a sketchbookaholic. So every time I go to the art store, I'm looking at the sketchbooks, and I have more uncompleted sketchbooks than I have finished ones. Gouache is a great medium for those, keeping a journal of your travels.
Yeah.
You're going on a really special trip. And it's not really a painting trip. It could be with your family, but you're an artist. Take those tips that I showed you in the beginning of this session. It doesn't need to be a complicated endeavor when you paint. Really understand how to do it quickly and efficiently, so you can really get these sort of half-hour, 45-minute paintings in whenever you travel, whether it be a painting excursion or not.
Mm-hmm.
You can fill up those sketchbooks, and they're nice remembrances of your travels.
Yeah. So as I'm watching you paint here, are you do you do primarily like all of your color mixing on your palette before applying it to your painting, or do you try to kind of reconstitute some of the areas on your painting to mix on the painting directly?
I do both. So it's really, this medium really isn't conducive to pre-mixing sort of some secondary piles of color. I guess you can, but I'm really a brush mixture. And my knowledge, I think, having mostly worked with a limited palette, my knowledge and love of mixing color, I love to go in there with my brush and sort of, figure it out on the spot.
Yeah.
I'm not going to really use a palette knife to figure out those mixtures in advance. I don't think that works too well with gouache, but give it a try if you want to, but I'm really a brush.
Yeah, it hasn't worked for me. And I think being in Colorado where it's drier, I have a hard time with everything drying so quickly on my paper that I can't really mix on the paper. Like on the painting itself, I have to mix on the palette.
Yeah, now you just saw that I threw out a little spot of a sort of it's called I got it in Italy. It's sort of a sky blue color. I just felt this painting just needed that clean blue that you see down towards the horizon there. So I just wanted to pull out that little special note. So sometimes I'll do something like that. But going back to your comment on the use of dry paint, but that stuff on my palette that you see me mixing on is all dry at this point.
Yeah.
It's still useful. So with a little bit of water, and I always like to mix into those sort of dirtier areas, because almost all these colors have some sort of other color going on in it. So I think picking up some of that elsewhere really gets that sort of harmony in your painting. So don't be afraid of getting a little dirt in your mixtures. It could be helpful, but it's all usable. Even if those little piles dry up at the top, you just put a little water on them. Now they're never going to go back to how they were out of the tube, but they'll get moist, and you could still use them.
Yeah.
So they're not like throwaway piles.
So when you put together a dry gouache palette, how long do you let so you just, I assume you just fill the wells with the gouache and then you just let it dry for days?
Yeah, fill the wells, let it dry for I think it takes a good week or so. And some colors are going to dry quicker than others. But my recommendation on that, if you're going to give that a whirl, really get a container that is at least about close to an inch square, give or take, and a good depth, at least a half-inch deep. And actually squeeze out pretty much, I usually squeeze out a whole tube into one of mine. Squeeze it out, work it into the corners, and let it dry, because what's going to happen is they're going to crack naturally. And if you don't have the thing full, or just put a little pea size in there, it's going to crack and pop out. So really fill the whole thing up, and don't be stingy with how much paint you put in there.
And then what's your process for when you're actually out painting with that? Do you just spray it with a bottle of water?
No, similar with, I get my portfolio, as opposed to putting the palette up top, I clip that sort of dry box up at the top of my work surface. And I just start wetting my brush and wet the wells, and I spin in the wells with my brush. It's a really specific way how I use it. And I've got classes with how I put that together. But it's really is sort of a unique way how I do it. I don't like pick up paint and put it on a surface and mix my colors. I mix, if I want a green, for instance, I'll mix some blue, I'll go into my yellow well, I'll go back to the blue and then pick up some white, and they'll go right to my painting with it, which is why that setup looks so cruddy and messy.
Yeah. Okay.
But it works. So not
Yeah.
for everyone, but
I might
it's
have to give that a try. Yeah.
yeah. It's not that difficult. You really have to get over your predilection for wanting to, and I'm a neat painter and a neat person generally.
Yeah.
But with my dry box setup, it's like it looks
I have to let
terrible.
go of that.
Yeah, and don't be dissuaded. They look like dirty, but it's really just a film on top, and with little effort, you get back to the clean color quite easily.
Yeah.
So pretty.
No, I'm definitely a neat freak as well, so that stresses me out, but I might have to just give it a try anyway.
Yeah, there's no time for stressing in art. It's only.
Do you use a fixative over these, or do you frame them?
So yeah, really good question. I get that a lot. I just recently started using a fixative. Up to this point, my paintings, wash paintings, when they transfer to an owner or I'd hang them myself, have been under glass. But I found it pretty suitable. I've been reluctant to do a fixative because, I didn't want the, gouache tends to dry matte, and I really like that. But I use, I think it's Krylon matte spray fixative. And that works well. It doesn't change the finish too much, and it certainly protects the art from water. So what you definitely want to do is, if you do one of these with the regular but workable gouache, not the acrylic stuff, it is prone to being destroyed if you wet it. So It's got to be either under glass or fixed. So
yeah, I was playing with fixative. So I did a pet portrait, and I did the Krylon, but I didn't have the matte one. I just had the regular one. But the artist that I was following did that, then did an isolation coat, and then did a permanent varnish on top. And I was having a heck of a time with that varnish because it just kept streaking everything. It wasn't picking up the paint. It was streaking itself. So I ended up having to remove the varnish and do the whole thing over again. Yeah, it was not a fun thing. So I like that you can actually I'll have to look for that, a matte varnish.
Yeah. I don't have it handy, but if you want to email me afterwards, I can.
Well, I know I have the Krylon one. It's just not matte, so I'll have to see if I can find it in matte. Because that's why I like gouache, because I love the matte look of it.
Right.
So I didn't want to have to varnish it and have it be all shiny.
Yeah, I mean, even though it says matte, it does really give you a little bit. Think of like it's the equivalent of like eggshell or satin paint if you were painting your house, but it's not problematic. So yeah, I'd give it a whirl. I just take it outside and put it on the ground, and about 6 to 8 inches above the painting, I just go back and forth. Now, I know some artists, I've not done this, but some artists use cold wax on top of it.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah, I've not tried that, but just Google it. I'm sure there are plenty of demonstrations on YouTube that show you how to do that. But yeah, anything goes. You don't have to, but it's certainly something you can do.
Well, yeah, especially if you want to not have it framed under glass, because you've got to protect it from being, splashed with water or something.
And I don't know why pieces under glass get a sort of a second tier wrap on.
I don't either.
It's sort of strange to me. But some people want the plein air look, the framed plein air look.
Yeah.
It's fine. So I often, as you see here, I'll often use my go-to size is a 9x12 surface, either watercolor or Bristol paper or some sort of paper. And I usually tape it off to a smaller size, because when I'm in the field, when I travel and all that good stuff, I like to remove the tape and have sort of a clean look and a painting that you can handle without really touching the painting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you see me doing here. In the end here, you're going to see me remove the paint of the tape, and it gives you that sort of nice framed look when you're done. Again, not necessary, but it's one of the things that I like to do. So you can't really tell because you're not in front of this painting, but if you look closely, the painting quality gets pretty, it's pretty, there's a lot of paint on this painting here and there.
Yeah, there is.
So you don't want to, that's one of the things with gouache though, you don't want to paint a la Van Gogh, like out of the tube. It is prone to cracking, okay? So if you really put it on really thickly and it's unprotected, it might crack. Mine, I've been working with this a number of years, and have some that are years old, and that's not an issue because they're not really that heavily painted. But you can get a very sort of painterly opaque quality with it. But I really would caution about painting too aggressively thickly with it because it can crack.
Yeah, I did experience that in one of my paintings.
Yeah. So I think we're coming up on the end here, but this is sort of how I put that stuff together. You know, it's like, just like anything, it's really no different than an oil painting or an acrylic painting. You know, it's one foot in front of the other. You start out with your big sort of general decisions, and then you correct things as you go, and you decide what needs to be changed and what not. So, but it's a wonderfully fabulous medium, again, for the oil painter or the watercolorist who just wants in that regard too, I think it's good as an artist to have different things to sort of mix up how you put art together. Because that's one of the things that I do. It's like, sometimes I tire of oil paints, and then I'll do a gouache painting or do an acrylic painting. I think even just shaking up the medium gives you a different avenue to keep things fresh.
Yeah, that's what Eric was saying when he was playing with because he's primarily an oil painter, but then sometimes he'll dabble in gouache or watercolor, and it really kind of makes you think of how you can bring those into your other paintings. So how does oil painting, help inform pastel? How does pastel help inform acrylic painting? So I really do think that it's good to play in a lot of different things just to break it up and see if you can continue to learn.
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that because gouache painting inevitably influenced how I paint in oil. Because I work with the two mediums a lot, and I was specific on a specific type of oil painter, and then when I started using gouache more, I saw how it influenced how I painted in oil. And I think even though they have their separate properties and they look different, inevitably they sort of cross over, and how you paint sort of gets into one. And the oil paintings have gotten into my gouache. So I think it's just a natural sort of metamorphosis of how you grow as a painter. They sort of blend together.
Right. This is fantastic watching this come together.
Yeah.
I love that little sailboat.
At the end, I'm sort of putting those little dollops of jewels of paint, which, I could maybe sometimes get carried away with. But those are the moments where you can really sort of put those nice little jewel tilts of paint right on top. And gouache is perfect for just letting those sit right on top of your painting, and they just shine like little gemstones. So I love the medium in that regard. So here we are at the end. So like I said, you could just sort of take the tape off, and you sort of have this instantly framed little paint.
What kind of tape are you using? Because I struggle with whatever tape I find. I have artist tape, and it still will tear the paper.
Yeah, so because this surface is gessoed, the tape comes off easily, and that's frankly dollar store masking tape. So I don't really get anything too expensive or special, but that is a problem. So I paint on a bunch of different papers. So if the paper is unprotected or sensitive paper, like a really high rag content paper, you really want to watch what kind of tape you use, or don't tape it at all.
Yeah.
One tip I have is, you may know this, is if you think it might be prone to that, the first thing is to pull away from the image, not towards it. And the other thing is to use a hairdryer first to warm it up and pull it out.
That's smart.
That'll help release the tape easier.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Well, is there anything else, any other tips you want to share with us before we?
I think that's it. Yeah, it's a great medium. I can't tout it. I've been telling folks about this for years, and it's catching on. I could see it in everybody's work, and I'm glad to see that. And I'm happy to tell folks about it when I can. I do have a class coming up in this in March through Winslow Art Center if anybody's interested. And if anybody has any questions about anything I showed them today, they're free to email me if they want. I don't know if that's appropriate to do.
And what is the Winslow Art thing? Is that on your website?
Yeah, winslowartcenter.com. Just Google them, and it's on my website.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to drop your website in there. So someone is asking, what's the craziest thing that's happened to you while painting in plein air?
A dog peed on my backpack. It's probably happened to a lot of people. And the owner was like, "Oh, he does that all the time."
Oh, well, great. Thanks.
Yeah, nothing too crazy. Some cows have walked up to me. I think that's pretty standard for people working outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you deal with, so I know one thing that is a common problem for, especially for people like me who are new to plein air. So there's two things. So number one is like picking your scene, because there's so many things to like take into consideration. And then also dealing with the changing light as you're painting that scene.
Right. Oh, really good points. Because that's why I really encourage people to learn how to paint within a half hour to a 45-minute period. Actually call them sketches. Don't call them paintings. And that's the number one thing, because that's what I do when I go outside. I'll plan to do 2 or 3 in a 2-hour session. The other thing is I find looking in the distance really helps. So try not to do those things that are right up on top of you. Try and pull back and really look at things that are further away and really zoom in. Don't try and get all of it in. Go close up, or if you're able to get sort of the confidence to work on a couple paintings, do a couple scenes of something that might have inspired you. That's a bigger composition. But yeah, try a couple different options, but really rein it in. Try not to do too much. I think that's where everybody, when I'm working with folks, I say, okay, what are you going to do? Their first thing would be, okay, it's this. I was like, okay, let's rein it in. It's hard to do because there's so many beautiful things when we go out.
Right.
You want to paint it all. And the other thing is try not to be so, and I mentioned this before, so focused on trying to copy everything you're seeing so religiously. Let yourself go. Let yourself be an artist. Let yourself interpret, and don't worry about matching things so much.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem I have. I'm very mechanical and say, okay, well, that tree is there, that rock is there, so it's got to be here. And yeah, I got to let that go. Well, thank you, Bernard, for coming in today. I dropped his website in the chat. You can see his Instagram handle there. Be sure to check him out. Winslow Art Center has a lot of great workshops that they do, and he's been doing several with them, haven't you? Weren't you just in, was it Italy?
Yeah, I do a lot of travel workshops with them. I'm going to Greece this year and Croatia, and Provence is in the mix for next year. Yeah, I'm all over the place, and I do a lot with Winslow.
That's awesome. So yeah, be sure to check that out. Follow him on Instagram. Thank you, Bernie, so much for joining us today.
Nice to meet you finally.
Yes, I know. It was so great. I'm so glad I finally got you on here.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to check us out the rest of this week. We've got a great lineup for you. I'm going to be here again the rest of this week because Eric is preparing for Art Business Mastery Day on Friday. I think we have a slide for that. Yep. So Eric wants to help all of our artists make their art profitable in 2025. So if you need to work on the business of art, as Bernie called it earlier, definitely be sure to check that out. streamlineartevents.com/marketing. It's going to be really good. We have a lot of great artists lined up for it. I saw that lineup yesterday. So be sure to check that out. Subscribe to our channel on Instagram at Art School Live, not Instagram. It's on YouTube. You can also subscribe on Instagram, Eric Rhodes. But yeah, we're here every weekday helping artists learn how to paint and just enjoying life with art. So I hope I'll see you guys tomorrow. Everybody have a great week. Bye.